Ladies and gentlemen, the tiny DevOps guy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tiny DevOps. I'm your host, Jonathan Hall, and today I have with me Olaf Molenveld, who is the CTO and co-founder of Vamp, which has just been acquired by CircleCI. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. Olaf, welcome. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. Great pronunciation, by the way. I have a technical background, did my share of programming in the past, and then went more into architectural design role, technical consultancy, and have always been kind of working on the the boundary between technology and what kind of value can we get out of this new technology, and also the other way around, what kind of problems does the business actually have that we're trying to solve? Because often people ask in solutions instead of describing their real challenges. So I try to kind of do some matchmaking there.
Nice. Yeah, the famous XY problem, as we call it sometimes.
Yeah,
right? Yeah. Great. So today we're going to talk about actually. I met you on LinkedIn. I saw one of your a post that you had shared about progressive delivery, and I wanted to talk to you about that. So that's why I invited you on the show today. Of course, I'm sure everybody listening is familiar with the concept of continuous delivery and continuous deployment, because those are buzzwords around the entire industry. Especially if you're listening to a DevOps podcast, you ought to know what that means. But how is progressive delivery different? How is it the same? How is it different? What is it? Maybe you can just start with that.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like an umbrella term for a lot of methods and technologies to kind of control I would always say the rollout or the go live of software, because releasing and delivery and deployment are a little bit tainted, like a lot of semantics there. But it's a collection of things like A/B testing, canary releasing, blue-green, feature flagging, all these things that kind of give you the safety nets and controls to kind of reduce blast radius and segment your software rollouts.
Are there ever situations where you would say that progressive delivery is absolutely the wrong approach or the wrong tool?
You have these regulated industries where there's a lot of manual steps and checks and balances and sign-offs. And of course, you can introduce like manual gates as steps in the policy, but then it becomes a little bit harder, especially to kind of stretch it out into production. Maybe you can do it into like pre-prod or staging, but in those regulated industries, it becomes a little bit tricky. On the other hand, the thing with privacy makes this as an interesting case, because often like the testing or shift left kind of movements is like, yeah, you need to kind of replicate the production environment and have all the data, but that's not an option anymore when you are like a privacy aware organization. You cannot shift production data into test environments. So in that sense, it becomes maybe an advantage to start doing it into production. So it's a little bit like a double-edged sword, I think.
So it sounds like there's always trade-offs, as there are with practically any tool we choose to use. You know, if you only have a hammer and everything looks like a nail, you're going to make the wrong decision. So apply judgment.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Supposing that somebody wants to start doing any of these sort of progressive delivery approaches, is there anything really easy they can do? Does GitHub Actions make it possible, or is there some off-the-shelf, or can they just do this with Kubernetes, or do they really need a tool to do this?
Yeah, I mean, there's in the Kubernetes ecosystem, there's open source tools to play around with, because effectively what we do is we configure ingress in a dynamic way, and we use layer 7 kind of HTTP filtering. So there's like in the ingress space, there's tools that you can use, and you can basically create these configurations by hand. So that would be my first suggestion, to play around with what a typical ingress controller like Contour or any of those, or Envoy or whatever, or maybe Service Mesh offers you to kind of get a feeling on how you can kind of direct traffic and filter traffic and play around with that. Because in essence, it's automating that kind of thing. And then, of course, there's the other way, the other aspect, which is the conditions or checking verification, which is more like, okay, you hit like open telemetry, that kind of open tracing kind of area, where you say, okay, what am I actually observing? What happens if I send 5% of visitors to a new version? What am I looking at? What do I want to see? So, but all those things are available to you, and you can play around with them. They're in the cloud native landscape. Just pick one, and there's no perfect solution, never. It's just getting your hands dirty and just start playing around and get a feeling for what is possible.
What size of companies do you usually see having the most success with this? Is it across the board, or does it require a certain level of complexity in your organization that maybe you need to be a certain size before this really starts to be beneficial?
That's a great question. I think it makes sense all across the board. Obviously, when you're a smaller setup, you have more control. There's an integrated team or a few teams that have visibility on both the services, on the infrastructure, and on the application performance metrics. So it makes it easier to kind of, because it's about coordinating these things, like observing the application performance, but also observing technical metrics. So it makes it a little bit easier to set it up and start doing these things. Because a lot of the time it takes is not about the technical things. It's about like what kind of metrics do we actually observe, and then it's much more than only like Kubernetes health or some kind of HTTP status. It's also about maybe you update service A and you want to look at an API endpoint somewhere else to see if this thing doesn't become really slow or break down. So you need to kind of start thinking about how you can assess the performance of your application landscape as an end user would kind of perceive it. And that takes a little bit of time, because you kind of move it out of technical things that are direct in the control of the people, but you approach it a little bit more holistic. On the other hand, if you do this, it's automation. You make data that's already there actionable in an automated release pipeline. So if you have this in place, then scaling up is much easier. Adding more services to that pipeline, applying it to multiple teams, multiple environments. So for bigger organizations, it's also very valuable because it is separation of concerns. You can kind of bring in an intern or a new developer, and he or she doesn't need to know about this, what kind of conditions to check or what kind of segmentation. You push your code through the pipeline, and automatically this process is being applied. And so in that sense, scaling it up into a larger kind of organization also makes sense.
For just a moment, would you address the listener who's maybe interested in implementing canary deployments or blue-green or any of these sort of methodologies we talked about? What homework do they need to do? What metrics should they consider before they just run out and start implementing this?
Yeah, that's a good question. Typically, I would say start with something simple, low risk service like a RESTful service, stateless, because then you don't have the data kind of discussion. And just use the metrics that are out of the box, the health, restarts, HTTP status codes. We collect out of the box anyway, and then go with that and see how you can kind of extend your pipeline from CI into deployment into releasing, and just observe how it goes into production. And then you can start adding more metrics to observe.
It sounds like what you're saying is that the technical part is easy,
Yeah,
that which I think is maybe true for most of DevOps, right? You know, the technical
relatively
part
easy.
relatively easy. I mean,
Yeah,
you set up a CI pipeline. The first time you do it, it's exciting. And 10 years ago, the first CI pipeline, I was like, "Wow, you can do that."
yeah,
Nowadays, it's become second nature. We can all set up a CI pipeline. The hard part is convincing your developers to use CI, to write tests, for
yeah,
people to actually run the tests before you merge, and all these things. So it sounds like the human factor is usually what you're saying. The human factor is a bigger part,
yeah,
deciding what's important. I mean, I worked with a team last year, for example, where somebody asked for canary deployments, but they didn't have any concept of what are we waiting for. When will we decide to release to the rest of
yeah.
the customers? They just wanted canary deployments because it made them feel better.
Yeah, but that's the thing where we're discussing in the beginning, like asking for solutions, because this canarying or becomes a little bit like a magic silver bullet, snake oil kind of thing, and then you need to ask like why and what are you actually trying to achieve here? And in the end, this is all about process, because the going live, that's we make this distinction between the technical deployment, which is like what your CI pipeline builds, and then you do your Helm or your kubectl or whatever deployment mechanism you're using, which is like putting that artifact on some infrastructure and do run or up or whatever you do. But that's only one thing. Then this thing is running, but the going live is like a process. It's like, okay, who is this first segment of visitors that we're gonna expose this thing to, and why this segment, and why not another one? Are those beta users or are those like low risk users? And can we get the data out of this segment? Enough data? What is this data? What is the baseline? What are like the thresholds? And what do we do? What's the mitigation strategy? If it's not good, do we stop? Do we roll back? What is a rollback? Is that a traffic rebalancing? Is that a stop and a redeploy? Or this? So you need to kind of uh, think about the process. And typically we ask like, how do you do it right now?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of
Yeah.
metrics do you observe? What manual steps do you take? And then the first thing is let's automate some of these things.
So I want to play the devil's advocate just a little bit here.
Mm-hmm.
One advantage that I often coach teams on when talking about using continuous delivery or continuous deployment, one advantage I always tell them about is the psychological advantage that the developers feel a new responsibility when they know hitting that merge button means that their code is going to be in front of customers in 10 minutes. If we go to one of any of these approaches, feature flags or blue green or canary deployments, and it removes the developer a little bit away from that pressure to that their code is going to be in front of customers. Like there's still another chance to check this. How do you address that?
I think nothing changes. It still gets into customers. Only it doesn't get into all your customers. You start with your low risk segment. It's like A/B testing. You create like a bucket or a segment. Say, okay, what's my most obvious user base that I want to test this release against in production settings, without affecting my entire population, because maybe there's these high paying clients with very low risk appetite. So there's always a few people like your friends and family kind of segment where you say, okay, I did a release, I did an update, can you take a look if I didn't miss anything? Actually, that's kind of what it is. So you take a little piece and it's still exposed, and then it gives you basically the freedom to kind of try it out in production environment with production data, with real visitors and users, and observe how it's working before you go to the next stage.
What else would you like to say about progressive delivery? Whether it's somebody considering trying it out for the first time, what have I failed to ask about?
Yeah, I think the most important takeaway is that it is about the process. So in the cloud native space, we tend to focus really on the technological parts of the thing and self-service, and developers should be able to do everything. But I don't believe that. I think it's a shared effort between ops and dev, and also business side of things, where they think of new features, and the analytics part of things, where people observe actually how the platform is being used. And so for me, it's about how you kind of start working together between those different responsibilities, even though maybe in a smaller setup, these responsibilities are shared within single roles. But yeah, think about the process and then pick the technology that fits, instead of, like you say, pick some technology like cargo culting, and then try to kind of apply it to something that maybe doesn't really fit with your way of working. So that would be my main thing. Like, okay, try to think about how you want to work, and try to also involve your non-technical co-workers. Like, what do they need to do their jobs? What kind of dashboard controls, visibility do they need? And how much of your task can you offload to your colleagues? Because maybe it's not technical thing. Maybe it's something for somebody at the business side of things, or analytics, to control a release or configure a release. You need to collaborate on these things, and be more like a enabler, facilitating these things.
Yeah, so I was recently looking at the Vamp website, and it says Vamp is a cloud native AIOps platform. Can you explain AIOps a little bit?
Yeah, talk to our marketing department. So, no, AIOps, of course, is like a buzzword a little bit, but the thing is, we collect a lot of data, and there is already a lot of data. And if you want to automate, you need to kind of apply machine learning to it, because you want to do anomaly detection, and you want to aggregate things, and there's different types of metrics like histograms and counters and all these things. So the AIOps part of things is more like, how can we apply intelligence and machine learning to all that data to make sense of it? And
then let's talk about cloud native. I think that's a pretty widely used term also. But if people are not doing a cloud native application, is Vamp still going to be valuable to them?
We require Kubernetes, so that's a hard requirement currently.
And let's talk about this merge, or this acquisition that just was announced.
Yeah.
What do you see? What do you see coming up in the next maybe 6 to 12 months, now that you're part of CircleCI?
Yeah. So a lot of exciting things, of course, but obviously the first task at hand is to integrate the features and the technology of Vamp into the wider CircleCI platform. And then, of course, also kind of integrate the vision that we have on releasing, which is not deploying, like I said, into kind of the mindset and the roadmap of where we go. Because it's kind of stretching, extending the use cases of the platform into also other roles, and more like towards the business release management if you're like a bigger organization. So that's basically what we will be working on.
Are you sticking around, or are you cashing out and going to the Bahamas?
No, we're sticking around. The entire team is sticking around, and we're super excited to do this. And we're still in Amsterdam. CircleCI obviously is a distributed global organization, and so locally we stay in Amsterdam, or we are also distributed over Europe. But that doesn't really change.
So for people interested in learning more about progressive delivery, what resources can you recommend?
The original term was coined by James Governor from RedMonk, and I guess the link will show up somewhere later on. So you can Google for it, and then I think there's some interesting pieces from his hand where you can start reading on the history of it. Basically, all over the internet, there's a lot of interesting content, of course, on our vamp.io website. We have all kinds of white papers and blog posts. And I think also on AWS, Amazon AWS, and on the Google website, there are some very interesting articles on what kind of patterns to apply when and when not, blue-green, A/B, canarying, and we will share those links, and people can read up. But there's plenty of interesting stuff to be read.
And if people are interested, of course, in hiring essentially Vamp to do the dirty work for them, you can go to vamp.io and look at the products and pricing. And if people do want to get a hold of you, what's the best place to contact you?
That would be either through LinkedIn or just send me an email, which is Olaf, OLAF, @CircleCI.com.
If you enjoy this content, but you don't want to wait a week for the next episode, subscribe to my daily mailing list at jhall.io/daily.